first one that comes to my mind is, how much do you want rowing to consume your life, right? How much do you want to give of yourself to the sport and not always receive the same amount back? I think that's the biggest thing that can be a really hard transition for, there's however many junior programs in the country. And then you also take in international athletes. So we're talking about all the juniors athletes in the world, right? And there are only so many NCAA Division I teams. So how much do you want rowing to consume your daily life? And what does that sort of consumption look like?
Other than that, you ready to rock and roll?
Ready to rock and roll.
Cool. All right. So for everyone listening, we have Lizzie Mitchell here, who is the associate head coach at Boston University and has an extensive rowing coaching background. And I'm very excited to chat with her because Boston is a school that I'm constantly hearing about, both on the women's side and the men's side. And obviously Boston, which is going to be actually my first question for you, Lizzie. Boston itself as a rowing hotbed, as one of the main area, or, one of the most popular places, obviously with the Head of Charles and all the things up in Boston. But Lizzie, I'm going to let you introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about your background, and for the audience and all the athletes and parents and coaches listening. But before we get to that, right, so you can share a little bit about your background. But before we get to that, tell us a little bit about I'm in Philly, right? I'm down here in Philadelphia. I rode this morning. I had the beautiful sunrise up in Philly. I'm always going to argue for Philly, but give me your argument for the rowing atmosphere up in Boston, just outside of just the university, but Boston itself. We're starting things a little differently today. I'm processing this question.
I like this. I like this. I think my one word answer is simply historic. Like, the Charles is just historic. And yes, Philly, I get it, right? Boathouse Row, that's historic too. But there's something about the Charles that, like, it's not straight. It's always throwing elbows, which you got to do in Boston sometimes when you get on the tee. And I feel like the Charles does the same to you every day, in that you're just like, you have to throw your elbows to get what you want whenever you're rowing, right? And so it's something about the environment of being in the middle of the city, like Boston on one side, Cambridge on the other, and having that aspect of like visibility in a sport that doesn't get visibility, right? And that's really powerful for our athletes, both on the college level and then recruits and then junior level athletes, right? Just being in the middle of it and having the ability to show the sport to the city every day is pretty darn powerful. And yeah, it's a historic place to row, and coaching on it is a wild time. I definitely cut people off every day, and I apologize, but
for anyone listening, yep.
Yeah, I'm sorry. But yeah, historic, I think is how I would put it. So
yeah, cool, very cool. I think because I go up there, I guess once a year, obviously with the Head of the Charles. I don't know how many times I've been up there, but it's been probably somewhere between 5 and 10. So it's always an amazing time to be up there. And I guess we're less than a month out between when the Charles kicks off. So I will be up there again. So maybe
nice.
Usually I invite myself into someone's into a team's boathouse at the end of the podcast, but I'm doing it here at the front level at the front of the podcast. So yeah. So but anyway, so Lizzie, why don't you give the audience again? We have the people listening to this are usually high school athletes, coaches, parents of high school athletes. Anyone else who's a fan of rowing, hopefully, right? Whatever the audience is made up of. But I am really excited to talk to you because your extensive experience now at BU at Boston, but also your background as, a coach at different levels with your D3 coaching experience, both on the women's and the men's side for a degree at Bates. Obviously, from what I saw in your bio, like, you guys have an amazing success while in your time at Bates. So I'm excited to learn a little bit more from you and be able to help athletes navigate just what is college rowing all about. So before or with that, as we dive into some things, tell us a little bit about your background. Tell us a little bit about, your coaching experience. And then also you can probably take an opportunity to kind of tell us a little bit about where's Boston, BU today in terms of
Sure.
just starting up with practice, getting things going, classes, races coming up. Give us the full insight into you and what you guys got going on up in Boston.
Yeah. That's a big question, but I like it. So I'll start at the beginning. My mom, my dad, and my aunt are all or were coaches. So my mom and my dad coached at, before I was born, Coast Guard and Dartmouth, and a few other places in between. But then when they started a family, they stepped away from coaching for a multitude of reasons. But now my mom is back coaching at Bowdoin College, which was fun to coach against her while I was at Bates.
Yeah.
So that was fun and interesting. And then my aunt, not many people know this, but Liz O'Leary. So she was at Radcliffe for 30 plus years and was the head coach there.
No way.
So yeah. So that's where I got my name. And so rowing, basically I say that because rowing was always in my family and it was always something that we talked about and I knew about this sport. But growing up in Maine, there's very few junior rowing opportunities. And so I didn't actually do it at all in high school, but I knew of it. And then when I went to college, that was not on my radar at all of I'm going to college for rowing. It was more, I'm going to college for the academics that I want to follow. And if they have a rowing team that I can try to join, awesome. So I went to the University of Vermont and they have a club team there. And I joined and it was very much of a fairy tale, like, holy smokes, I understand why my parents and my aunt are obsessed with this sport. This is awesome. And so I had an awesome time there and learned how to row there and just totally got hooked on the club level. And then once I graduated college, it was very much me trying to figure out life, which I think everybody has that moment post-college. It's sort of all of a sudden you have to be an adult. And so I was bouncing around in like 4 or 5 different jobs at a time, waitressing and after school work, tutoring and like all of this stuff. And my sister-in-law was basically like, you're awesome with kids. Why don't you try coaching? I was like, that's a great idea. So I reached out I was in Portland, Maine at the time, and I reached out to Waynfleet, which is a small private school there. They have a team. And I sort of had my second fairy tale moment of my first day coaching was basically like, holy smokes, how do I make this my career? Like, this is awesome. I love this. I love the way that I get to interact with athletes and just help people find their true path and whatever that path that is. And using the platform of sport to do that is a pretty awesome way to do it. So I worked at the junior level for 2 years at Waynfleet, and then a job sort of came up at Bates. They were looking for a volunteer assistant coach. And I applied, and actually, no, they were looking for an assistant coach. I applied, and the head coach, Peter Steenstra, who's now my forever mentor, will be fine with me saying this, but he called me and said, you are not at all qualified for this position, but I really like what you have to say on your resume and everything. And so I just want to have a conversation with you. And we had an awesome conversation. Turns out we both went to the same high school. And so he brought me on as a volunteer assistant, and I could not have been happier. I didn't get paid a dime. And I worked as a volunteer for 2 years while also working a completely other different job from, 7 to 3 p.m. And then I went for practice 3:30 to 7 p.m. So it was a loaded schedule at first. And then after 2 years of volunteering, I was brought on as the men's assistant for 4 years. So those first 2 years, I pretty much worked with the women's team. And the later 4 years, I worked as the men's assistant coach there. We had an awesome amount of success, like you said. It was a really, really fun time to be there, both on the women's side and the men's side. And then after those 4 years, which was in 2021, so we sort of got through COVID, and I decided I needed to take a jump or a change. I moved out to Seattle for 2 years, and took a position with a junior team out there. Realized how much respect I should have for junior coaches because that is a hard job. But really wanted to go back to the college level just because I liked that sort of time in an athlete's life of learning how to become an adult and the process of doing it. Um, and so then I applied for a job at the Pacific Lutheran University, which is another D3 school, was a head coach there for a year. Had a wonderful time with that. And then this position at BU opened up, and I loved the West Coast, but I'm pretty close with my family. And so I wanted to figure out how to get back here on the East Coast. And so I transitioned back, and I was lucky enough for Malcolm to take me and give me this opportunity to coach at the D1 level and coach in Boston on the Charles again. So yeah, that's sort of how I got here. And then for the second part of the question, in terms of sort of the team and how we're doing, last year was a wild ride, to say the least. It was a full new staff for the women's open weight team. So Malcolm came from the lightweight team and got the job of director. And then brought on myself and Kira O'Sullivan as his two assistants. And I think last fall was just sort of keeping our head above water with transitioning to a new staff, the team figuring out sort of our training plan and our stroke as well. And I think what we figured out is we just wanted to strip down the stroke and bring it back to simplicities and just get everybody on the same page. And then in the spring, we were able to sort of like take the simplicities of that stroke and build it up enough to where we were getting I would say like 90% of the speed that we really wanted out of the athletes, which was fun. And that ended with us, I shouldn't say ended, but we achieved a sweep at our conference. So Patriot League conference, we swept that with all three boats, which was super exciting. First time they've done that. I don't want to say ever, but I think it's been a while since they've swept. So that was great. And it earned us a bid to NCAA's last year. So yeah, it was a wild ride for sure. And now we're in year 2, and I think that the team is definitely looking better at this point now than they were last year at the same point in terms of team cohesion, our goals, what we're sort of looking for in a stroke and in the training plan. And people had a better idea of what we wanted for them to do over the summer. So fingers crossed, but right now it's looking good.
And are you guys in like full on, like, prepping for fall racing mode, like training? And I'm assuming, I don't know, are you guys morning practices? Like what's that week look like for the team now at this stage of, can't believe it, we're already, more than halfway through September, but what's the schedule look like in terms of, or like, what's the week look like for the team now? Are you guys fully locked in and prepping for whatever the first race is?
Yeah. So we're finishing our full second week of full 20-hour weeks. And we're definitely ramping up the prep for sure this week. So the first week was just sort of get everybody out there, look at everybody's stroke as far as the first years, get everybody back on the training plan and the schedule. We practice in the mornings. Those are our main water times. And then the afternoons are sort of, I call them the a la carte practices, whatever we need during that time. And so, yeah, first week was that. This week we call battery week. So testing their physiological batteries with a different test Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and then Saturday. So that's been fun and eye-opening for some, for sure. And then after this week, sort of taking those results, giving them more specific training profiles. So when they're doing steady state on their own or any work on their own, helping them figure out where their training should be, both heart rate and wattage wise. And then hopefully that will then lead to some good solid training when they're on their own, but also with the prep into Charles selection for sure. So yeah, full steam ahead.
Why I got two questions. So
yeah.
Why is it why is it called battery week, first off? And then second, like of those tests, like is it like a combination of erg and run, like erging or running or cross train? Like what's like you don't have to go into too much of the specifics, but like
Yeah.
what's the context of some of those testing opportunities that the athletes are getting put through this week?
Yeah. So it's called battery week because you're testing your battery as an
I like
athlete
that.
and
Okay.
how much you can do in that week of testing, and sort of where your limits are and how far past your limits you can go. At Bates, we did a similar thing, but it was called LTAs, so limiting threshold assessment. So again, threshold battery, very similar.
A little bit more technical, and with the
Yeah,
a little bit more scientific for
yeah,
Bates
exactly.
then. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. But both of them are similar in the tests that we do. So here at BU, we do a 30-minute rate 20 to start the week. Then we do a 5K. Then we do a minute and a max watt, which we did this morning. And then tomorrow we'll do our 2K. So that's sort of how it paces out. So 5 tests. And then with that information, we're able to put it into, I actually stole this from Peter Steenstra, so I have to give him credit for it. But we put it into basically an Excel spreadsheet, and it gives us percentages based on other tests. I think he got it from the Canadian national team. I mean, people have done all sorts of different versions of this, right? But it gives us percentages of where the 2K compares to your aerobic base and where the 1 minute and max watt compares to your 2K. And that percentage shows us maybe where you're overperforming and where you're underperforming, or where you're sort of steady and neutral, and gives us as coaches, and therefore the athlete specifically, an opportunity to fill those holes and focus their training more on where it needs to be focused, rather than just sort of going in blind and just continuing with what they think is right. So
That's awesome. I love that, and that's
yeah.
that is one battery week. That is quite pushing people to the limits. And with is that something that, just because I love that, that's like
Yeah.
these are some of my favorite topics to talk about. But
Yeah.
is that something that is repeated throughout the fall, or do you branch off into something that is like one of those specific tests, like the 30-minute or the 5K or whatever it may be that you do periodically throughout the fall? Like what's
Yeah, no,
the
so
next layer look like?
yeah. So we do that same week of testing every 5 to 6 weeks of the
Okay.
season. So we
Yeah.
typically get 2 in the fall, sometimes 3 if we want, but it's typically 2. And then in the spring we do the same thing. So it's really nice because a lot of the times we're not really using the tests for selection. It really is for the athletes, right? And for them to see their progression. And then when they get those percentages, I color code them for those visual learners, right? But they can see where the red is, where the black is, where the blue is. And they want it to be sort of like a expense sheet, right? You want it all in the black. Or maybe in the blue when you're outperforming and you have fast 2K or fast 5K for that season. But it is intentional that we do it throughout the year so that you as an athlete understand fully like where your training is and how you're either filling those holes or creating larger gaps with what you do with your personal training. So
All right, what's up, everyone? Kevin Leslie, and quick interruption to the podcast to tell you about the At the Thousand Collective. The ATT Collective is an online community for high school rowers who want to better position themselves for long-term success at the college level. And in the collective, you're going to be invited to 2 group coaching Zooms per month, featuring top coaches, elite athletes, rowing experts, where we're going to dive into topics centered around training, rowing performance, college recruiting, personal development, you name it. You're also going to get an opportunity for a live Q&A where you can ask individual questions to help set you on your own path. You're also going to receive a weekly newsletter with erg workouts, core circuits, tips and tricks for rowing and recruiting, and also highlights from any previous Zooms so you can begin to incorporate those into your own practice. Lastly, you're going to get unlimited access to all ATT online courses and programs, most notably the Erg First, Row Second online course, where you can begin to do some training at your own pace. So the purpose of this program is to help athletes get the information and guidance to help them take that next step and feel prepared heading into college rowing. So if you're interested in joining, we're offering 50% off your first month. go to the description below, grab the code, and we hope to see you in the next Zoom. And you'll also receive your first newsletter as soon as this upcoming week. So again, join the community. Let's have some fun. Let's keep pushing and evolving our rowing. And I hope to see you soon. Now back to the show. Peace. I love that. That's awesome. And the frequency that you do it, like, and be able to get, like, because a lot of people they'll kind of narrow down into like one of the specific tests or anything or something, you know, like whether it's 5K, 6K or whatever it might be, 30-minute, you know, we did it at rate 24 in college, like 30-minute was a common one that we would do once a month or something like that. But to hit them with a little bit of exposure to everything, I think is actually really awesome, like fascinating and cool, because like you're identifying weaknesses and you're able to track trends in those developments. Right. Like, are they improving in each of these different categories? Very cool. I love that. And with that, you mentioned to kind of keep it on you know, your, you know, Boston and what you guys have going on this fall. Like, are athletes, and I think this is good for younger athletes to understand, you know, athletes who aspire to row at an NCAA qualifying type program like that, like, are they like, what's you said the afternoons are a little bit more a la carte, like provided to them based off what they need. Describe that a little bit more. And is that something where it's like athletes are encouraged to do extra sessions on their own? And if they are, like, what are those supposed to look like? Are they erg cross training? Are they tailored around whatever the, you know, the battery week? Like, describe those the afternoon sessions as well. If you guys are perceivably practicing, you know, 5 or 6 days a week, probably 6 days a week in the morning, what is that total workload for them and commitment for them in the afternoon as well, just to shed a little light on the Division I athlete experience?
Yeah, sure. So there are still required time blocks in the afternoon, but what we do, I guess, is the a la carte aspect of it, right? So Tuesday, Thursday is when we lift. So we're in with our strength and conditioning coaches on campus. And so that's it varies depending on class schedules, so that we're a little more it's a little more of a gray area of when that happens, just depending on people's class schedules. But we try to make sure that it's just 2 groups, so you're still lifting with a decent amount of people on your team. So that's Tuesday, Thursday, and then Monday or Friday. So it's never an and, it's always an or. And that's to keep us within the 20 hours that's given to us by NCAA rules. So on Monday or Friday is when it's sort of what we need during the time of the season for, and even sometimes for specific boats. So sometimes we'll do an erg in that session. Sometimes we'll do just a full cross train, but we want everybody to be cross training together. Sometimes we'll do a very like technical, but 45 minutes. Oh, of course the lights turned off. Sorry.
No worries.
45 minutes sort of technical row. Sometimes we go out in pairs and small boats and singles. So it really just depends on what the team needs. And we also use that time we have a mental performance coach that we use. And so we have that time set aside for that every 3rd week, to make sure that they get that sort of stuff. So it really depends, how we use that Monday or Friday afternoon. And then as far as extra minutes, if you have the time and you want to be good at the D1 level, at times you have to go over those 20 hours, but we as coaches can't require it. So what we do in our training plan is on the bottom, we label it as solo minutes. And it's suggested time depending on your year, where sort of your training zone is, which is taken from battery week. And how much experience you have coming in. So first years, if you're coming in and you're a walk-on and you've never really done this type of load, you're going to have the least amount of solo minutes, right? But if you're a senior or a grad student and we know the workload that you can handle, you're going to have much more solo minutes assigned to you. And those solo minutes, again, aren't required, but they are suggested in the sense of like, if you want to really build on what we have here and fill those holes that you see in battery week, then that's the time to do it. So
yeah. So it's essentially, right, like you kind of have your 9, I would say, organized sessions, right? If you are Monday through Friday plus Saturday, plus your 2 lifts, plus another, session that is
Yep.
broken up either Mondays or Fridays.
Hmm.
No, that's awesome. And I think, and I think just for athletes out there, at the high school level, it's just good understanding that it's like, okay, like there is opportunities or days where I'm going to be, asked to train twice in one day. Like that should be a normal
Yeah. Yeah.
thing, at
Yeah.
the college level. So I think, the
Yeah.
fact that you
Exactly.
guys, yeah. So, and with that, I'm curious, like as we branch into more just college rowing as a whole, and having, and again with your experience both at the D1 level, D3 level, D3 men and women's side. Um, I'm curious for you, like tell me a little bit about, like, are there any, having experience, and maybe we just keep it, you can branch into the men's side, as well, since you do have a lot of experience there. But
Yeah.
if we think more so about women's rowing, NCAA, Division
Hmm.
three, Division one rowing, I'm curious for you, like, what would you say are some of like the biggest differences in, and we can keep it rowing specific, and then maybe branch out into, maybe if you do have some thoughts on beyond just what you
Yeah.
do on the water and the erg room, but what are some of the
Yeah.
differences in D1 rowing versus D3 rowing, or being part of a D3 team? What are some of
Hmm.
the bigger differences to you in terms of like what they actually do in the sport, right? The rowing itself, the competition, so on and so forth.
Yeah. The first thing that comes to my mind is time. The amount of time that is put in at the D1 level is a lot more with the coach involved than at the D3 level, right? And so I'm involved a lot more in their training, and at the D1 level than I was at the D3 level. And there are aspects of that that require much more personalized attention, with the D1 level than the D3 level. I think D3 athletes come into it, and I tried to say this during recruiting at Bates and at D3, of that, you have to take ownership of your training, because for whatever reason, whether it's time management, lack of staff, right, staff athlete ratio, NCAA regulations about when your season is, right, at the D3 level, there's just more limiting factors to what the coach can provide for the athlete. And so the athlete has to have that much more ownership over what they're doing as a rower, and then also as a student. At the D1 level, there's much more opportunity for me as a coach to provide for the athlete, whether it's on the water coaching, in the tanks, on the ergs, in the weight room. And they come in saying rowing and academics, well, some of them, rowing and academics are 50-50, right? Some of them maybe 60-40 one way or the other, but for the most part, it's pretty 50-50. And so they're having to walk the line pretty heavily with that. At a D3 school, one of the biggest things that a lot of people went D3 for is because they wanted academics to be first. Rowing is a very close second, right? They are quick at the D3 level, and I've seen it firsthand. But there is an aspect of, like, not many people in D3 are going to choose post-season or post-collegiate careers in rowing. And so they need to rely on that academics strongly. Not that D1 doesn't also have to do that, right? But there is an aspect of, like, okay, if you want to race the big dogs, you got to compete with the big dogs, right? And so there's a sense of, like, you just need to put in that much more time to you as an athlete in every aspect of the word, right? Physically, mentally, emotionally, socially, all of that needs to be managed at just that much more of a heightened level because of the competition out there. So, yeah.
That's a great, that's a great, because I know, with D3, and I'm assuming, I know on the men's side, as you know, like there's that window where you have to be, hands
Mhm.
off in terms of like
Mhm.
direct coaching, and obviously,
Yeah.
with the D3 side, I'm sure it's the same thing, right? So it's like you have to be kind of or sorry, with the women's side, it's got to be, it's the same
Mhm.
thing where it's like
Mhm.
they have to, although they are putting in really quality work, the time, you know, with coach is a lot different than
Yeah.
on, at the D1 level, where yeah, you are spending 20 hours, a week with these athletes.
Mm-hmm.
And in many ways, they are doing some stuff on their own in order to even accelerate or position themselves even better. So it's like that is a borderline, again, borderline full-time job in the student, uh, environment, right? So and that's interesting. I think and it's great to have a little bit of understanding. And I think another question bridging off of that there's D3 rowing, there's D1 rowing, women's rowing, like, which to me, like, it's so competitive, especially when you look at NCAAs and like the amount of schools that compete there,
Mm-hmm.
the number of schools that are probably interchanging. Like men's rowing's a little bit more like we kind of know, a lot
Mm-hmm.
of the schools that are going to be there very
Mm-hmm.
frequently, if not always. It's very
Mm-hmm.
top heavy to a degree. At least on the Division One IRA side, like you kind of
Mm-hmm.
know like who's going to be there for the most part. Outside of maybe there's some fighting for those other spot, like those last couple spots, but in women's rowing, like it's different every year, and the
Yeah.
competition level is especially at the D1 level, and that requires athletes to, if they want to compete, if they want to be in one of those NCAA boats, it requires them to have a level of commitment that is pretty significant to their weekly
Yeah.
schedule. So I'm curious for you, like from a high school rower standpoint,
Mm-hmm.
who aspires to row at the college level, whether
Mm-hmm.
it's D3, D1, you have experience rowing for a club program, like in whatever way that is, like what questions should those athletes be asking themselves as they are sitting as a sophomore, junior, senior, whatever in high school? What questions should those athletes be asking themselves as they start navigating the process of figuring out, I have, 100+ schools to choose from. Like, where do I even begin? And from a competitiveness standpoint, like what questions should those athletes ask themselves?
Yeah. That's a really good question. The first one that comes to my mind is how much do you want rowing to consume your life? Right? How much do you want to give of yourself to the sport and not always receive the same amount back? I think that's the biggest thing that can be a really hard transition for, there's however many junior programs in the country. And then you also take in international athletes. So we're talking about all the juniors athletes in the world, right? And there are only so many NCAA Division One teams. So how much do you want rowing to consume your daily life, and what does that sort of consumption look like, right? Is it something where every spare, not, I shouldn't say every spare minute, but the spare minutes that you have, do you want that to go into rowing in some sense of the word, or do you want that to be more focused on your social life, or do you want that to be more focused on academics? Now, there's always outliers, right? Like there are the really high academic schools that are also really high performing in rowing. We aspire to be one of those. We have the high academics, and I think we have all of the ingredients to be pushing into the top 10. We're not there yet, but that is definitely a place that we want to be at BU. But I would use, some of the Ivies as an example, right? Princeton's been crazy fast for a long time. Brown's been fat, right? They all have their speed, and they're also really high performing academic schools. And so as a junior athlete, thinking about sort of your consumption level on a day-to-day basis, not as like, oh, this is what I want to get out of 4 years, but really thinking about like, what do my days look like, and how do I want to be spending my days? And if your gut right tells you that I don't want rowing to consume my everyday, then you should probably look D2 or D3, because you're still going to row with really fast people. You're still going to have an awesome team environment. You're still going to be held at a high standard. But because of the way D3 specifically, I don't have experience in D2, but because of how D3 is specifically set up, it is set up to provide that balance for you because of the NCAA rules around it, right? Those rules have changed a little bit since I've coached at D3. They're now counting days rather than weeks. So it's changed a little bit, but still for the most part, it limits your consumption of rowing and how much you spend in it for you, right? At the D1 level, the best way I describe it to recruits is like, think about your parents working a 40-hour work week, right? 9 to 5 situation. We, as a D1 athlete, have you for 20 hours of that week, which means the other 20 hours are spent in class, most likely. And that's your 40-hour week. And then on top of that, you also have to eat. You have to sleep. You have to socialize. You have to do things that provide you fun, right? And enjoyment. And so when they sort of think about it like that, it hopefully provides a light bulb of like, oh, I don't want that much consumption of rowing in my life because that's just too much and I don't want to walk that line. Or then there are some athletes that are like, yes, can I make it 50 hours a week? Right? So it just depends on the individual. And I think asking yourself, like, what do I want my days to look like? What do I want my time to look like? And how much pressure am I okay putting on myself? And then also how much pressure am I okay taking from coaches, from professors, from your other teammates as well. So, yeah.
I love that answer. That is that is great. Wow. And I think like, again, like as you speak to the level of commitment where it's like, and again, like, and I think and I love that you announce, like, because I think there are different tiers with, like, every program is going to have their makeup of athletes who are every day rowing. I want to be in the varsity A. I want to be in an NCAA boat. I want to be putting in the extra work. I'm going to be doing all these different things. And then probably every team is going to have the athletes who they want that or else they wouldn't be there. Mm-hmm. But it's probably like there's even layers within those different categories where it's like, okay, like some of those athletes, they might be fully in on rowing when they're there. But then as soon as they leave the boathouse, they're now part of 17 different clubs and academics and all these different things. And there's, there's nothing wrong with that either. But it's like choosing when you are there, like, okay, well, if you want to go and be a contributor to a top end school, like that's the way I always like to describe it to people. It's like, you want to be a contributor to a D1 program, D3 program, whatever it may be. And there's a difference between being a contributor and being someone who is skating by and staying on the team and doing everything right in the coach's eye, but they're not necessarily going ahead to try to be in a top level boat, right? And I find that like really interesting. And I think, I think every program probably has examples of that. And I think for you, like, bridging off of that, like, because this is great. And what would you define, or like, I'm trying to think of like good ways to think about this. You can take this wherever you want, but
okay. Careful.
What would you define, or like some of the motivations that you kind of understand in terms of like D1 rowing for a program like yourself, like for high school athletes as they think about it, it's like, talk to me, and again, this is a pretty broad question, but talk to me about like some of those motivations that you pick up for athletes who do when they set foot on campus at BU. Like, what's their motivation to be a part of this team or a Division I rowing program? And I'll give you a couple examples, right? They might be someone who aspires to row at the Division I level because they can't see themselves not competing for a top program and trying to make the NCAAs, and they want to go as far as they can with this sport because it means that much to them at the high school level. There's other athletes who they find so much connection in the community of being a part of a team and one that is having the same struggle, which is, performing at a high level. There's others who maybe they want to flash the colors of, I'm a Division I athlete and this is great, but they don't really know what they're expecting when they do get there, but they do want to, wear the brand and feel like they are a part of someone. And then I think there's other people who there's a financial motivation where it's like, hey, I want to get a scholarship to a school, but maybe their level of commitment to that sport is they're kind of leading with the financial incentive of getting a scholarship opportunity or
Yeah.
whatever it may be. And in Division 3, that's not, to my knowledge, something that they can pursue, right? Like it's
Right.
all, there isn't athletic aid on the D3 level, but on D1 there is. And I think
Mm-hmm.
it's something that would be interesting to hear from you. It's like, how do you filter through or understand, like, what is your understanding of, as you see athletes once they do arrive at BU or when you're in the recruiting process, like, provide a little context on some of those motivations that athletes might have to be at that level. Again, really broad question, but it's just something that popped up.
Yeah.
I feel like you'd be someone who would be able to put a lot of thought into that.
Yeah. I could go so many different directions. So I think that the first thing that I try to sort of filter out when I'm recruiting and talking about motivations is it intrinsic or is it external? Right. And if it's external, why? Right? What is the external factor that is your one and only or biggest motivation? Right? Is it to um, well, I won't go down that line, but I don't love people that just have external, right? Because those external aspects, whether it's your family or the outside world or being seen as a D1 athlete, right? Those are all things that can always disappear and they're never really truly your why. And so one thing that I like to ask sort of later on in the recruitment process is like, what is your why? Like, why do you do this sport? It's a crazy sport. It's really hard. It takes a lot of time. It is not something that you can just be talented at and then go fast, right? It is a work-based sport and you have to put in the hours to do it well. So why? Like, why are you doing this to yourself, right? And as long as that internal and intrinsic motivation is there, then I'm all for it. I don't really care what the motivation is, right? But I think one of the answers that I see the most is how powerful, especially for young women, how powerful it makes them feel. And I love that, right? Like if you as a woman haven't ever really felt like you can really like own something and be strong and be powerful and sort of fill that role that maybe your older brother or your cousin or your dad or whatever male figure in your life has filled for such a long time, I think that like that to me is one of the biggest things that I hear from recruits, especially again young women who just haven't ever really had that opportunity to feel that. And so I think having that space and providing that space for them is really awesome, and I hold that pretty close to my chest to know that I can give that opportunity to them. But then there's also the aspect of being able to go to a top end university. And a lot of that, as you said, is money based, right? And so we have the opportunity to provide, we have 20 full scholarships. We can split that up however we want. And it feels really good to be able to provide that to somebody who wouldn't, in other ways, have the opportunity to come to a school like BU, right? And so a lot of the times that's international athletes who haven't have had awesome success in their home country, but want the academics of a university in the States, and reach out, and they have really good rowing careers, and their motivation is sort of two-part, I would say. One part is because they really love the sport and they have the passion for it and whatever that intrinsic motivation is, but then it's also, I don't have the opportunity to get that type of academic rigor in my home country. And I really want to excel in so and so field. And I know that if I go to the States, I can be provided that. But I can't afford it, right? And so it feels really good to say, you know what? I can afford it for you in a sense, right? Like I can provide you that scholarship and you can come and study here for 4 years and get a great degree and also row on a team that is hopefully going to be performing at NCAAs every year, knock on wood. But yeah, the motivations, I mean, they're all over the map. And I don't think that there's one that's a right answer, but I think as long as you know that it's inside you and you follow it for you and nobody else, is really, really important. So, but one of the things that I do with the team, and this may be a tangent, but one of the things that I do with the team is I do the 3 whys. And so the first why is just, why are you here? Right? Pretty simple. Some people just write, I like to row, right? Or I like to go out on the water every day. Some people write a whole paragraph. But then what they don't know is then I ask why again. So read that statement that you just said and ask why. And so you get a little deeper, and then you ask why a third time. And by the third time, some people are like, I don't know. And they have to reach really internal and understand, like, why? Like, why actually are you here? What is that passion that you have to tap into when it gets really hard? And so the 3 whys. And then what I do with that is, and I forget who I got this from, but I think I tweaked it a little bit. But the second why becomes sort of your goal, your motivator for that time in your life, whatever that why is. And the third why is what I call a pilot light. So if anybody's ever had a gas stove, right, you have the pilot light that's always burning, but it's small, and sometimes you have to provide it a spark, right? And so that pilot light's always there, but sometimes you got to tap into it and like provide it its spark to reignite whatever that passion is, whatever your why is, whatever the motivator is, during the times when, you know, it's Charles selection and you're in the library until 2 a.m. because you also have an exam coming up, and you miss home because you're in America and not in Italy or wherever it may be, right? And all of these things are piling up, and you have to fully say, like, why am I waking up at 5 a.m.? What is it that drives me to the boathouse every single day? And hopefully that pilot light can reignite you and be sort of the light at the end of the tunnel when you feel like everything's closing in on you. So, because college is hard. It's hard, right? It's not easy, especially at the D1 level. So, yeah.
I love that. That's and the that was a great answer to a question that I made up on the fly that I think like and you answered it really, really well. A couple of the takeaways, I think, I love the external and the internal motivation. And it's like you seek the internal. Yeah, people are going to have a little bit of external motivation, but that internal is really what powers you through good times and bad. And like, I think that's a powerful one. And now obviously identifying that through the whys in many ways, like is, you know, even more powerful, where it's like, okay, well, what are some of your internal motivations? Like, and no, I love that. That's great. And now my next question for you is like, okay, like of those athletes, like your roster, you said that you have some international athletes, probably some athletes from, you know, up in the Northeast, maybe all over the country. Like, again, like BU is always a program because athletes are familiar with Boston because they go there all the time. And BU is always one that athletes have on their radar in some capacity. And obviously you're looking for specific athletes to help push your program towards the goals that you and the team set out for yourself. So you can't take everyone, obviously, right? So my question for that is, okay, like, and you can take this as specific or more even like as broad as you would like in your coaching experience at the women's level, at the NCAA women's level. Like, what are some tangibles and intangibles, again, 2 directions, like what are some things that you guys look for in athletes who are going to be successful at the college level, at the Division I college level more specifically? And that could be as, hey, like, obviously, you know, everyone's going to, you know, talk about erg scores and, you know, where they are physiologically. And there also could be some other layers to their tangibles, like their facts and figures, their fitness, their rowing experience. And I'd love for you to talk about that to the extent that you can. And then also, are there bridging off of that intangibles, right? And you already highlighted one is like that internal motivation, that internal flame. But tell us a little bit about the athletes that you find or that you are looking for and because you do see that they can be successful at the next level.
Yeah. Big question, but I like it. So I'm a very visual person, so I think of things very visually when I'm describing it. But the way that I typically describe it to athletes as sort of like the layers of the earth, right? And similar to what I was just describing with the why, I want to know who you are at your core, which I realize makes the job harder, right? Because in the recruiting process, which sometimes feels really short, even though it can last, a year sometimes, but sometimes it feels short. It's hard to get to the core of a person, right? I have to ask the right questions and really understand who you are. But I want to recruit the core, but the core isn't the only thing I'm recruiting, right? So there is that, like, what is your passion? Why do you do this? How did you find it? Is it something that you see as a job or you see as an opportunity, right? We always talk to our athletes about, like, you get to do this. You're not forced to do this, right? So we want athletes to come in and be like, I get to row and I get to row at BU. And that's awesome. It's not something I have to row or I have to row at BU, right? So really trying to figure out who you are as a core, and then the way that I think about it, I can't believe I'm saying this, but how my mind works is I sort of have to, like, drill down through the rest of the layers to get to the core, right? And so the next sort of layer out that I see is our sort of where you're from, right? What program do you row for? Is rowing in your family, or is it something that is totally new to you? What school do you go to? Where in the world are you? And sort of how is rowing seen in that part of the world? And then the next layer out is like the pure statistics, which is something that you all see right off the bat, right? What is your 2K? What is your 5K or 6K? What again, sort of in addition to the second and third layer, like, what program do you row at and how heavily do they focus on the erging? And then academically, what is your GPA? What kind of classes have you taken? And are you academically fit for BU, right? We are a pretty high academic school. And so first and foremost, if I'm going to send you to admissions, I need to know that admissions is going to accept you, right? So that's something that I have to look at first and foremost is, are you academically fit for the school? And then, are you a speed that we want to either take right away because you're crushing it and you're, sub 710 or sub 7 and you're just like, you're on it as a junior? Or are you somebody in the 730s, 720s your junior year, but you've been rowing for a year and you row at a club that, gets out on the water in the spring, but doesn't have a ton of time to, really erg. And your potential is just sky high, right? So there's everything in between, right? And so we have to look at all of those layers. But as I look at all of those layers, it's like, how quickly can I get to the core of you as a person? And then what actually is at the core of you as a person? I hope that answered your question.
No, it did. And my follow-up to that is, what gets you to drill deeper? So you have the to use this earth analogy, you have the crust of the earth, right? The surface level, just like surface layer, facts and figures.
Yeah.
What gets you to drill deeper? And obviously, there has to be some kind of exposure from one of the athlete. Like, you have to actually see it, right? You actually be like, you have to know that they exist. And whether that's via email or questionnaire, or you shake hands at a recruiting event, whatever it may be. What gets you to drill deeper into that second layer of recruiting or understanding?
Yeah. A lot of phone calls and a lot of time, and specific questions that I think safely puts the athlete and the recruit in somewhat of a vulnerable space. So one of my favorite questions is, what do you look like in failure? Right? Like, when we all have bad days, we all have days where we go home and we're just like, that was not good, right? Whether it's you see it as failure or not, right? But, like, what do you look like in that space and how do you react? And what are the ways that you then work towards a better version of you, right? Because that's really what we're all trying to do. We're all just trying to be a better version of ourselves every single day, right? And we use sport. This is a tangent that I won't get on, but we use sport to do that, right? And so as I'm asking and talking to recruits and going through a lot of phone calls, right? It's like, what do you look like in failure? How do you act as you work through it? and what are the tools that you have learned or that you're still trying to learn to work your way out of it, right? Because I can see you on your best day when you win youth nationals or you're selected to a U23 or U19 team, and like that's a great day, right? We all look pretty good on our good days, but what do we look like on our bad days, and how do we work through that process, right? And so how athletes answer that question, and then hopefully therefore start to open up a little bit and understand that, like, I actually want to learn what you're like when you don't feel like yourself, right? Because that's really going to be the true person that we're recruiting. I'm not recruiting the gold medalist as much as I'd love to, right? I'm recruiting the person that didn't get selected to the U19 team and therefore has to deal with that in whatever way they deal with it. So yeah, that's my favorite question, is what do you look like in failure?
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And my last question on that front is
Yeah.
just with that, like, okay, of those athletes, like what, and you and the other coaches who are probably taking these phone calls and stuff like that, that first layer of navigation through from your side of the table, that first layer of navigation, what does, how do you identify like who to talk to? Or is that something that you guys think about? Like, is it from the recruiting database or is there another coach who talks to the coach or to the athletes? Like, how do you guys kind of get through that first layer of, or not the first layer of drilling into it, but like even just like seeing through the clouds of athletes who are coming to you this earth analogy is fantastic. I'm going to use that. Yeah. But how do you kind of see through the clouds and be like, okay, this is an athlete that, right? Like maybe they, you have connections with some programs that you talk to, or they submit questionnaires or, a recruiting profile or email directly to you. Like what gets you to be like, hey, like this is, and you and the other coaches, like what gets you to kind of be like, okay, this is an athlete worth, not worth is the wrong word. An athlete I'm interested in talking to,
Sure.
because I feel like it's a worthwhile investment for me to set up a phone call and talk to this athlete and learn and be able to ask those second layer questions.
Yeah. This is the part that was really hard for me to come to terms with, especially at the D1 level, is like, you just have to look at the raw statistics, right?
Yeah.
Have to look at their GPA. I have to look at their transcript, and then I have to look at their ERG scores and the program they wrote for, right? And if you're up in an ERG score range that we just don't see as fast enough, right? You're probably, I should start with, I try so hard to email everybody back. The emails that I write back differ in that first layer, right? So if you're at an ERG standard that just isn't what we're looking for or what we need, right? I'm going to write back with an email that says something of, we're looking for individuals that are at this range for a 2K or a 5K. Keep in touch. Like if you get there and BU is really one of your top schools, heck yeah, reach back out to me. But at this time, like there's so many people that we're talking to that we don't have the bandwidth to talk to everybody, even though your potential could be there. Right. So I do my darndest to respond to everybody, because I really believe that everybody deserves that shot. But we have to just look at the pure statistics first and foremost and see if you're academically fit for the school and if your speed is something close to or at what we're needing at that moment. So yeah, that first layer is tough, because I'm very much of a person that I was a very average college athlete. I was not fast by any means, but I loved the sport. And so I never want to close the door to anybody that has that pure passion and might have that potential. But I've sort of had to come to terms with, like, there are too many people for me to give all of that time to with the recruitment process. And it's the lesson for me of, I need to draw the line somewhere. Like we all have that in some way of our life. Like you need to draw the line somewhere. And so that's where I have to draw the line.
Yeah. And I think that's like, it's a good thing for athletes to know. It's like, hey, like, there is that barrier to entry, to kind of get to that point of this dialogue being, something that both parties are invested in and both parties want to take on. So, no, I appreciate like you shedding some light on that, where it's like, hey, like you're probably you and the other coaches are getting flooded with emails, flooded with communication,
Yeah.
and you do have to make some decisions about who is, worth your time to pursue further.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's an important thing for athletes to understand. And so I got a couple more, or I got one more big question, and we can kind of close it out. I don't want to take up all your time. I know, you guys are in the middle of, is this battery week or is next week battery week? This is
This is
battery week.
battery week.
This
Yeah.
is
We
battery
got our
week. Okay.
2K tomorrow.
Let's go. Okay, so you already
Yeah.
had the 30-minute you already had the 30-minute and the 5K, and then like a great
Yep.
Saturday, doing some 2Ks.
Yep.
That's great. So
Yeah.
very cool, very cool. Well, my final question, and then we can kind of close it out with just some just general thoughts, advice, and things like that
Yeah.
that you may have on your mind for athletes who are going through this process, or coaches as they educate
Mm-hmm.
athletes on this process. But my last question is, you talked about the we had this where we talked a little bit about D1 and D3 and the different things that some of those athletes are, kind of different level of work and commitment and things like that go into those two levels. But what you'd also highlighted was you guys do a little bit of mental work, meaning
Mm-hmm.
like mental
Yeah.
performance work, and
Mm-hmm.
shed a little light not only on just that, but please talk about that a little bit if you can. But
Mm-hmm.
also, like, what are some of the other resources and things that you guys do to help better position the athlete as a whole,
Mm-hmm.
for any part of their life? Like how like at the Division 1 level, at BU specifically, even, right? So maybe talk about the resources first, and then talk to me a little bit about like some of the areas of mental performance and some of those are things that you talk about with the athletes. So shed a little light on that for
Yeah.
for people listening.
This is my bread and butter. We could have a whole episode on this. So I'll try to make it quick. But first, with the resources at BU. So what I talked about with the mental performance coach, it's an awesome thing that BU does. So they take graduate students who are in sports psych specifically and match them with a team. And they become our sports psychologist for the year or sometimes 2 years. So it's sort of their clinical work in that aspect. Which is awesome. And so again, we schedule a time with them. Typically, it's every 2 or 3 weeks that we meet with, or the team does. The coaches aren't there specifically because we want them to have that separate time with the sports psychologist, so that if they need to talk about things that shouldn't, or they don't feel comfortable talking about in front of the coaches, they have that space to do it. So that's the biggest thing, but that's very much in a group setting. BU as a whole also has all different types of physical and mental and behavioral health resources that are endless. And I feel very lucky to work at a school that has that and provides that space for athletes and their students. And one of the amazing things is with our athletic training staff, they can really expedite the process for athletes because they know that their schedules are packed and sometimes they don't have the time to go through, whether it's a questionnaire or an intro call or whatever it may be. And so our athletic training staff can help expedite that process into whatever office is best for the individual, and for whatever they're going through. So the recent resources are endless. And we also have the city of Boston at our fingertips. And if it needs to be an external resource outside of the university, we have the ability to do that as well, which is wonderful. So I never feel like one of my athletes is going to slip through the cracks in that sense. I really do always feel like there is some sort of net that will catch them at the right time that they need to be caught, which is awesome. So that covers the resource part of it. The mental side of rowing is so important and is not talked about enough. One thing that I could go a bunch of different ways, but one thing that I love about being a coach is being able to get my athletes to a point where they feel safe to be vulnerable, right? Once that vulnerability is opened and provided and shown to me, then it's like, okay, now you trust me, I trust you, and I can now push you further, right? In all aspects of you as a person, right? Your social, your emotional, your mental, your physical, your tech, your academics, right? All of it, right? I have the ability to push you further because you're comfortable being vulnerable with me. And that's one of the things that I hold really, really close and feel very honored to hold that space for people is giving sport as a place to be vulnerable and learn about yourself. So I'm very empathetic in that sense, and I want to make sure that people are comfortable and and feel safe and heard, no matter how many people are on the team, right? The performance or the training of the mental side is something that I feel like I still need to get a degree in because I find it fascinating. Like I think I should go back for a psychology degree of some sort. But it's something that I learned or started learning about and learned a huge chunk of it at Bates with Peter. He does something, and all of the Batesies will know this, is quiet sitting. It looks like we're meditating, but it's just we're sitting quietly. And the way that he first puts it is it's a time to simply sit quietly and not move. And whatever happens in your mind happens in your mind, right? So as first years, you come in and you're sitting and you're supposed to have your eyes closed and you sort of like peek open, you're like, what the heck am I doing just sitting here, right? But then they slowly learn that this is a chance to actually understand how to be present, right? And everybody talks about the fancy word of mindfulness, but that's what we're doing. We're trying to understand how to be mindful. And the best way that I can describe it is understanding what the present moment means and not worrying about the past or being anxious about the future, right? Because the past already happened. You can't control it. And you sure as heck can't control the future, right? But what you can control is your present moment and how you respond to whatever is thrown at you in that present moment. And so with quiet sitting, we work on just being present and really understanding like what your breath is doing, what your heart rate is doing, and therefore the thoughts that are going in your mind, and how much can you quiet those thoughts and just be in the moment to whether, you hear a bird chirping or you hear an ambulance pass or you hear somebody sneeze or whatever those things are, can you just observe it and not analyze it, right? And so the observation aspect is being mindful of that happening. The analyzing is you going into trying to control the future or worry about the past, right? So I digress, but the purpose of it, right, is to then take that into, we're all trying to compete at the 2K level, right? Like we want to win a 2K race at the end of the year. So what can we do mentally to provide our bodies physically the opportunity to do that, right? One of the biggest things is our minds telling our bodies, you shouldn't be doing this. This is way too hard. You should stop, right? Or, hey, I almost just caught a crab. I'm going to worry about that for the next minute of this piece, right? We used quiet sitting and mindfulness and mental performance, especially at Bates, and we're starting to do it a lot more here at BU. But to be able to recognize whatever happens in that moment and not allow the process of amygdala hijacking to take over and just be able to stay fully in the moment and achieve what needs to be achieved, no matter of the external factors. So yeah, again, I don't have the education in it, but it's something that I feel like I've been practicing with the team and also myself. I often quiet sit with the team of just fully understanding like what is the present moment and how can I best perform no matter what's happening outside. Like one of the best, I'll end with a little story. I'm going to mess the year up, but I think it was 2019. It was when NCAAs were in Indianapolis. And Bates, I was with the women. The men had an okay season, but we made it to IRAs. I don't know. I don't remember, but I was helping out with the women. And the course had been delayed like 8 hours because they had a flood a few days before. And with Indy, they get a ton of logs and sticks and everything. So they were trying to clear the course, but instead of saying, hey, it's going to be an 8-hour delay, it was, hey, it's a half hour delay. Oh no, it's going to be another hour. Oh, it's going to be 2 hours, right? So it was like nobody could really leave the course. And it was just this mental, like, when the heck are we going to get on the race course? So it was a little while, but we finally got on. The two V8s of the D3 level were the first ones to race. We were in the first heat of that. So we were the first race after all of these delays. And we go off the line and we have breakage within the first 100 meters. So, it's like everybody's anticipating racing, and then all of a sudden the announcer's like, oh, and Bates has stopped.
Turn it around. Yep.
And we're all just sitting on the sidelines like, oh my gosh, what just happened? Luckily, it wasn't huge. One of the footplate things, anyways, it was fine. But then that specific boat had to wait, I think, like 3 or 4 races before then they could line up again. Our coxswain, Maya Sation, I hope she is listening to this, but she was extremely smart and recognized the situation and took the boat as far as she could away from the race course, and they did a quiet sit. Whether it was 30 seconds, a minute, 2 minutes, they did a quiet sit in the boat. And essentially it was her opportunity to say, that's now in the past. That does not control our fate of what this race is going to be. They then lined up again, and I think won the heat by open water. Like, it was incredible. And I think there are many other crews out there that would have let that anxiety stay with them and build to the point where they couldn't perform how they wanted to perform in that race. But for that boat specifically, I mean, yes, the rowers were pulling and pushing and working hard, but she won that race for them fully because of the mental opportunity and the mental space she gave them to allow their physical bodies to do what it needed to do. So, yeah, I tell you, I could go on hours about this stuff.
That is perfect. That is a great, I hope everyone, listens and takes notes on that, because, and I am a big advocate for, or I'm a big supporter for you, whatever your certification needs to be, or get a degree or something like that, so that you can teach it, because that is all fun stuff that I think coaches think about in terms of the layers of it, but to be able to go, or at the surface level, but to be that in depth and understanding of the why behind it, I think that is a something that I admire a lot. That's really, really that's awesome. So teach that. Teach. Yeah. Keep that rolling, because I think that is something that that athletes should, or that is incredibly valuable to athletes, and they could be easily sitting in the car or the boat bay just doing it for themselves, and it has real impact on them in that specific day. Man,
and it gets them off of these, hopefully.
Yeah, that's a big one. So
big one. Yeah, I think one of not to go on another tangent, but I'll go on a quick other tangent. One of the coolest things that, again, I have to credit to Peter Steenstra. I hope he never listens to this, but is the way that he talks about sort of the mental side of rowing is peeling away the onion, the layers of the onion, to the point where you leave class, that's one layer, right? You walk to the boathouse, that's the next layer. You change in the locker room, that's the next layer. To the point where you are shoving off the dock and you're just at your core as a rower. You have no control over academics. You have no control over your relationship. You have no control over, calling your mom back because you haven't called her in a week, right? Whatever it is, you are simply on the water. And I think that's really special about our sport that no other sport has, right? Soccer team, you can go to your bench and check your phone. I mean, depending on who your coach is and whether they allow phones, right? But it's unlike any other sport in that you're literally excluded from the rest of the world and you're just on the water and you get to just do that. And that's awesome. And so provide yourself that time to just do that when you can't do that, right? If you learn how to quiet sit and you can just do that without anything else, that's a huge gift to yourself just as a person. So, yeah.
That's incredible. That's incredible. I love that. And that's, again, I find that to be very fascinating, as well. I look into that stuff a lot, but again, not to that extent where you're actually literally practicing it with your team in the moment it's no, I think that's incredibly valuable for anyone out there listening. So, Lizzie, my last questions for you before we wrap things up. So I'm gonna go a two-part, right? Because I want to make sure that you can get on with the rest of your rest of battery week and all the things that you guys have here through the week. But my last question for you, two parts. Number one, tell me something about BU or Boston that has nothing to do with rowing that allured you to this specific role, or that brought you from, whether it was Maine or the West Coast, whatever, like brought you in here to take on this role, like that has nothing to do with rowing. Tell us something about, again, it could be school related or just the boathouse community or the rowing community. But talk about that, and then the second layer to that, or really it's a completely different question. I'm just going to throw them both at you. That way we, but the other one is like any advice that you would have for athletes who are navigating this process or beginning to, so again, two parts, but advice that you would have for athletes who are starting this process of identifying, figuring out what, all the different things that go into aspiring to be a college rower. Where do they begin if they're sitting in their chair listening to this, and, haven't really started, or maybe they are starting, but they're realizing like, okay, what's that next layer of stuff? And it could be speed rowing related, or it could be completely different where it's like, hey, like quiet, sit, calm down. You're okay. The path is, you're going to be all right in the long run. So two completely different questions, but maybe they tailor to one another, or maybe they bridge, to one another in some capacities. Right. But tell me something about Boston, the BU community that attracts you that isn't rowing. We can start there.
I think one of the biggest things that when I was first talking to Malcolm about the position and sort of why BU, is that it very much feels like one happy farmyard and there are no silos, right? So I think at some universities, you can feel siloed in your department of like, we're athletics and we're just athletics, and we're engineering and we're just engineering, and we're theater and we're just theater. And obviously there is a sense like I have yet to go to the theater at BU, but I don't feel like I am siloed from them. And the other thing is Boston University to Boston, right? We are very much Boston's university in the sense that like, the line between us and the city, there is no line, right? Like you step out your classroom and you're on the green line, literally, and the T, and can take you anywhere in Boston to another T, right? To another line. And so it's very much like there are no silos, and it feels very blurry in a good way, and that it feels like the whole university is working for the betterment of the rest of the university. And I haven't had that extent of sort of collaboration at this level before. Like I think Bates in a small D3 school, it's natural because there's just fewer people, and you're naturally going to speak to more people at a small school where, we had around 2,000 students, right? Here at BU for undergrad, we have like 18,000 ish. So it's a huge difference, but it feels like I can collaborate with anybody that I want to collaborate with. And that feels good, right? Being a employee of a place where I feel like I can ask questions and I feel like I'm supported, and I feel like I am supporting others while the city is also supporting us is awesome. And then it just provides that much more, like, we all know collaboration is better than just you and you trying to do your work. And so you learn so much more in that space. And I give credit to our AD. Like I've never really worked with an AD that has specifically said like, I'm here to support you. Right. And that's awesome. Like there could be ADs that are like, I'm your boss, and that's that. Right. But Drew here is very much like, I'm here to support you. And obviously, yes, I'm your boss and I'm your boss's boss, but like, we want you to do well. And therefore we want the athletes to do well. And it feels like that farmyard where every species is helping every other species out to succeed. So it's a good ecosystem to be in, and our ecosystem extends to the city as well. So that was really attractive for me coming here to BU. And then the second part, what would I say? Say it again.
Advice you would, I know I should have just kept
Advice.
them as separate. I should have just kept them as separate questions, but you gave that was great for the first part. But no, like, just, we can close things out with like any advice that you would have for just athletes out there who are interested in rowing in college, getting started
Yeah,
with this process, looking at this, you know, world of, hundreds of, 100+ schools at the D1, or, D1, D3, even club out. Like, what advice would you have for those athletes who maybe feel like they are maybe left beat or not, you know, in the like they're like struggling to stay up to date in the process, or they perceive
sure,
that they're not up to date in the process? Like,
sure.
just overall, like, what advice would you have to those athletes who are interested in rowing at the college level?
I feel like the first thing I would say is do it for yourself and nobody else. I think it's easy to let, and this does not go against parents or family, right? But it's easy to say, well, my parents think I should go here, or my parents think I should do this, right? And yes, your parents have been helping you your whole life, and awesome, credit to them. And this is your process, right? Like, you are either close to turning 18, or when you get to college, you're going to be 18 and you are considered a legal adult at that age. And so understanding what you want currently, and also what you want to become as a person, and trying to figure out where those values align with the values of the university and the teams that you're looking at, right? So um, figuring out that sort of, again, sort of those consumables, that consumption of what is the college and university and team giving me, and then what am I also providing it. And I very much think that if you can figure it out for yourself, and take the advice of parents, take the advice of friends, take the advice of teachers, right? Like, educate yourself. I think that's really important. And I always say in recruiting, like, I'm not a saleswoman. Gosh, I would never go into sales. I would be horrible at it. I want to educate you on this so that you can make one of the first big educated decisions of your life for you, right? And so as you're getting into the process, it can feel crazy overwhelming. And I get that. But really, like, sitting down with yourself in your room alone, just writing down, like, these are the things that I want to either achieve or I want to work towards while I'm at university. And hopefully that can then help guide you. Like, I want to, I don't know, the first example that comes to my head is like, I want to have awesome internships every summer, but also be able to train, right? You probably want to be in a city or close to a course, right? So, of course, I'm biased. I use Boston, right? We have a lot of awesome internships, and you can also train on the river, and you're right there, right? Or you want to completely step away from rowing for the summer and go work at the summer camp that you went to as a child, right? Probably D3, right? Yes, you can still train and run and swim and do whatever you want, but you don't have to have that level of success coming back in the fall, right? So really understanding, what are your values? What do you want to do for you? And how can that align with the university, both academically, socially, and athletically? And hopefully you can get all three. Sometimes it's hard, or sometimes one takes a little more learning and trial and error to get there. But I think that's what I try to instill in my recruits, is like, you're not going to offend a coach if you say, like, this isn't for me, right? Because honestly, we have hundreds of people reaching out to us, and so I can't be offended. Even if, as I've worked on you for a while, like, I can't be offended if you say this isn't for me, because good, like, I'm so glad you figured that out for yourself. That's awesome, right? Go find the school that is for you, because you will excel there, right? You don't want to be sold on a place and then go and be like, this is not for me. Yeah. This is actually the opposite of what I want. But I was sold on it because my grandfather went here and my teacher told me that I would get the best degree here, and yada, 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 whatever the reason is. So, yeah, I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, no, it absolutely did. And no, this was Lizzie, this was awesome. Like you're a coach who I'm definitely going to reach out to for part two at some point down the line.
Oh, please.
Because you crushed. I could we could talk all day, but I know you got things to accomplish
Yeah.
here with your team. But any like anything that we can like, I'm assuming I can highlight, and feel free to share in like whatever ways athletes who are interested in learning more about BU, like Instagram,
Hmm.
email, like whatever, like give us, how can athletes who are interested in learning more about what you and your program
Yeah.
have up north in Boston have going on, how can athletes learn a little bit more about that?
Yeah. I feel like as a millennial, I should be good at social media, but I'm pretty awful at it. But I do have a coach account, so I'm pretty proud of that. So yes, you can definitely reach out to me on my coach account, BU Coach Mitch. They call me Mitch from my last name. We also have the Terry Women's Rowing account, which is actually run by our athletes. So we have a specific athlete or two assigned to it. So I think they do a great job with that. So Instagram, always an option. I'm an old school email person. I really love just the email. So I love that. And then once we sort of get the conversation going and we have a recruiting relationship, then texting and phone call is great as well. And then we have, like all other schools, we have our questionnaire online, and that's really important to fill out if you are serious about the school, because the coach will then look at those statistics, and it's also shared with our compliance and admissions office. And so we can't really act at all in the sort of unofficial, official visits, scholarship type talks until we have those questionnaires filled out. So that's a really important step for everybody to do, no matter where you're looking. But yeah, with us specifically, I'm an old school email type person, but you can find me on social media. Instagram only. I don't have Twitter or Snapchat or any of the others.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Instagram's the one that's the one that they're
Yeah, I
all,
feel like that's it.
yeah.
That's it. I
Yeah.
can take a pretty picture. So I'm working on
Yeah.
I just got a new phone that has the cinematic video. That's
Ah, there you go.
yeah, yeah. So,
Uh, just take, if you want content, like you practice in the morning, just take sunrise pictures. I'm telling you,
yes.
it's take sunrise pictures, put a little
Mm-hmm.
information. Like I had this
Mm-hmm.
conversation with a couple of friends, like rowing, like if you just need easy, lazy person,
Yeah.
content that comes out great, sunrise pictures. It's
Yeah.
perfect.
Yeah.
So anyway, Lizzie, I'll let you get on with the rest of your week. This was awesome. Your openness in sharing a little bit about the team, the college rowing process, and the mental side of our sport is something that I hope everyone, listens to and writes notes and takes advantage of, because this was a blast. Other than that, good luck as you prep for the fall season. Good luck with the rest of Battery Week. And I look forward to, now I can invite myself potentially when I'm up in Boston, maybe at least getting a tour of the boathouse or something like that,
For sure.
to kind of see some things. So, but I look forward to maybe connecting when I am up in Boston at the Charles in a couple of weeks. But other than that, good luck as you get rolling. And thank you so much for coming on.
Oh my gosh, thank you. This has been a blast. I gotta say I was nervous when I started, but then I start talking and it's fun. So thank you. This has been great. It's been fun.
Yeah, you crushed it. You crushed it. Thank you.